Welcome back, everyone. I'm Edward, and I think we need to talk about Scooby-Doo again. For those not quite as invested in the Scooby-Doo franchise as I am, this might all be new to you, but 2022 has been a rough year for Scooby. At least part of the reason for this is that Scooby-Doo is owned by Warner Brothers, who themselves have been having the worst year possible. Things have gotten so bad for Warner Brothers that they've actually canned a nearly complete Scooby-Doo Christmas special entirely for tax reasons, which sets a worryingly bad precedent and leaves me very concerned about the future of Scooby-Doo as a franchise. But that's old news. Warner Brothers is collapsing in on itself and the executives are in the process of burning down the studio for the insurance money? Who cares? That's boring news. We have more important things to talk about. Namely, we're here to talk about Velma. They made changes to her character and we can't stand for it. Change is scary and should be avoided at all cost. For those not in the loop, the last week has been an absolute shit show for Velma, when, in a short period of time, two different Scooby-Doo projects released their controversial takes on Velma in marketing material, which has led to people reacting to it online. Which has led to some of the most frustrating and least productive conversations I have seen in some time. But as frustrating as this whole thing has been to watch, I do think there are some interesting lessons that can be learned by taking a closer look, and maybe while doing that we can clear up a few misperceptions and figure out why people are so mad. Let's start at the beginning of the week. So Scooby-Doo's annual movie came out on the 4th of October straight to DVD and streaming. And soon after this clip of Velma reacting to new character Coco Diablo in a cartoonishly over-the-top fashion goes viral.
The cute one's right. Esteban, show them my brilliant observations.
This clip was then used as the centerpiece in several short articles on entertainment websites with titles like, Velma is finally a lesbian! In new Scooby-Doo movie, Velma comes out of closet! And that's how many people found out about Velma being a lesbian for the first time, through an article which will use one clip from a brand new movie and which suggests that this is some big new change to the continuity of Scooby-Doo. Keep this framing in mind while we talk about the next event. Velma the series. This has already had several super mini media cycles in which people find out about it and get upset. If you want to find out more about the history of the series, I'm going to recommend this video by Nerdsync in which he talks about the history of the series and the reactions to it, both the valid criticisms and the unfortunately quite common latent racism. But clip notes of the situation, Velma the series is a series developed by Mindy Kaling in which Velma is the main character. Scooby-Doo will not be present and the other three humans will be reduced in importance. Also, allegedly, the show will be taking a more serious and dark tone. So why is this noteworthy? Well, a couple of reasons. Firstly, Mindy Kaling is an Indian woman and has chosen to have this version of Velma reflect that. Additionally, Daphne will be Asian and Shaggy will be going by his first name, Norval, and will be black in this show. Or, in other words, they are going to be deviating from the standard canon in order to make the show more inclusive. Velma and all the conversations around it re-entered the discourse with the release of its trailer in early October. The trailer was poorly received for various different reasons. Personally speaking, I was not particularly impressed. I found the humor a bit juvenile, and its attempts at being cute with its self-awareness I felt fell flat and came off more annoyingly self-aware.
Hello, Velma. Do you like solving mysteries?
Yeah, but I'm actually much more three-dimensional than that.
I bring this up because I want to demonstrate that I am aware that there are reasons not to like this show, and that I don't think you're a bigot for not being excited for it. There's definitely been plenty of conversations critical of the show that are based on its merits. However, it would be inaccurate to suggest that the majority of these conversations have regarded anything other than the changes to the franchise in order to make this show more inclusive. Most of these conversations have been critical that they would even dare do such a thing. The general dislike of both projects and the perceived disrespect to Scooby-Doo lore really played into each other in order to make the general reaction significantly more negative than had these been isolated incidences. Now they're seen as a trend and the new direction for Scooby-Doo instead of just being choices made by individual Scooby-Doo projects. There has not been a universal response to this situation. There's been plenty of positive responses to Velma officially being labeled as a lesbian. There's been an influx of fan art, of compilations, and Google did this for a bit when you Google Velma's name, and I think that's pretty adorable. Velma the series, on the other hand, has not been quite as divisive. Most people are not overly happy. Some are still cautiously optimistic, including myself. But both of these announcements regarding Velma have received a large negative response as well. It would not be hard to make some assumptions about why things shook out the way they did. It, for example, wouldn't be hard to look at things through a woke lens, if you will. You've probably noticed that both of these events relate to the addition of LGBT and POC rep, where there wasn't any previously. And some people have not responded particularly positively to this. It would be pretty easy to paint this as a simple case of bigotry. If I wanted to do this, I could pull up some of the more hateful comments and maybe even pull up the latest right-wing grifter who's making a fool of themselves by complaining about how a cartoon for children is daring to suggest that POC and gay people exist! But assumptions are often wrong, and I feel like the framing of the issue like this feels overly simplistic and hollow. Yes, there has been straight-up racism and homophobia in many comment sections, but I'm going to try and not let that cloud my views on the average response. Because in researching this, I have found a healthy variety of opinions, perspectives, and hot takes, which is why I now want to work my way through some of the more popular talking points in assumed good faith. Because while I may not agree with them, I still think they merit genuine consideration. Wait! How can she be a lesbian? She has had male love interests. So there's two ways to interpret what's being said with this statement. The first seeing it as a blatant continuity error, and the second one making more of a semantics argument. Wouldn't that make her bisexual, not a lesbian? Let's tackle the continuity error one here and save the bisexual versus lesbian debate for our later section. I think we should talk Scooby-Doo continuity. Basically, there is none. At least, nothing consistent. It's not just a little floaty like in most superhero comics, where Batman has over 80 years of crime-fighting experience, yet doesn't appear to be much older than his 40s. No, Scooby-Doo's continuity is actively nonsensical, and appears to take joy in thumbing its nose at the audience. Do ghosts, magic, and monsters exist? Sometimes, when convenient to the story, and sometimes it doesn't. Even in direct sequels to stories where magic is real. Are they young adults starting their careers, or are they still in high school? What do their parents look like? What is their hometown? Was the Black Knight Ghost their first mystery?
Like the Black Knight Ghost.
Our very first case.
Or did they solve one more, like a week earlier when Fred inexplicably had brown hair?
I hear there's been some strange goings-on at the Coolsville Museum.
Or have they been solving mysteries since preschool? Have they met Dracula before? And if so, which one? Did they meet the Hex Girls right before they were famous? Well, the gang were adults in a town called Oak Haven? Or have the Hex Girls been touring for a while when they met the gang in a town called Crystal Cove while the gang are still in high school? And, most importantly, is Scooby-Doo a show within a show performed by actors who have the same names and personalities as the characters they play, as suggested by the Scooby-Doo Goes Hollywood movie and the 50th anniversary?
Stage 12,
Where we've been filming ever since our original series, Scooby-Doo, Where Are You?, premiered on Saturday mornings in 1969.
Simply put, this series is so long and sprawling and disconnected from each other that you really don't know which shows and movies are in continuity with each other unless explicitly stated in the text, and even still expect massive continuity errors. So, to ask if Velma being attracted to men in one series is contradictory to her being a lesbian in another series is to be overthinking the franchise. Why does Velma need to be a lesbian? Why can't they make a new character instead of changing a pre-established one? Variations of this were all over the place, often including words like retcon and forced diversity. I will admit, these really started to irritate me because it's hard to determine the motivations for such comments. This is the sort of wording frequently used by people that are annoyed that there are LGBT characters present in their media at all, But to the credit of the commentators, their wording did not so much suggest that they took issue with a lesbian being in their cartoon as much as they took issue with the perceived insincerity of the whole situation. That it was seen as a piece of political theater, pulled by a company with no real beliefs or morals, simply trying to pull a marketing stunt for entirely cynical profit reasons. And the thing is, that is almost certainly the truth, at least to some degree. This isn't the first time that writers have wanted to include subplots about Velma being gay, but in the past they were censored. This time, the producers ran the numbers and determined that it would generate enough buzz to be profitable. And everyone who has engaged in this conversation since then has been unwillingly helping with this cynical business decision, including me with this very video right now. We live in a society and all that. But despite knowing all that, it doesn't make it a fair standard to hold towards representation. You cannot ask that movies only use representation when the studio making the movie is doing it for entirely altruistic reasons, because that will never happen. Companies don't actually have morals. They aren't people. They exist only for the end goal of making money, so therefore only can have morals and values so far as it allows them to make money. So in conclusion, it doesn't matter if the producers are being cynical about it, as long as the writing is sincere. So maybe be a bit more charitable towards Velma as a lesbian. Except one problem with that. So I've been tiptoeing around this for about as long as I could in this video, but I think it's finally time to get into the real meat and potatoes of the lesbian retcon. These articles frame Velma coming out of the closet as a big new development. This isn't true. This isn't a new development, and it's not a sudden swerve out of nowhere. These articles are wrong, and I blame them for a lot of the confusion. So let's clear some things up by looking at the history of Velma. To do that, though, I think we'll need to explain queer coding. Queer coding. What is it, and why is it used? So back in the day, there was this thing called homophobia, where a whole lot of people were like, hey, LGBT people, could you, not exist, please? This did not work, so instead they decided, okay, well, we say LGBT people don't exist, so from now on, let's just not acknowledge that they exist. And for a long time, that's what happened, and TV shows and movies weren't allowed to reference gay people, like they weren't even allowed to exist in the stories. Funny thing about that, though, gay people still exist, and people wanted to feature them in their stories. This is where queer coding comes in. Basically, instead of explicitly stating the character's sexuality in the text, directors and writers would instead use common cliches, cultural references, and other film techniques in order to say things without using their words. It's a way of winking at the audience and being like, I can't say it, but we both know what I mean. So, what cultural references did Velma draw from? Well, actually, a pretty specific reference. Velma is based off of the, at time, quite well-known gay activist and openly a lesbian state legislator Sheila Cole. So yeah, I think the intent was pretty clear. Yes, this is a fairly obscure piece of trivia to hinge my argument upon, but I would argue that when analyzing a piece of art, it is not inappropriate to draw upon pieces of information which would be common knowledge to the intended audience in the heyday of the piece of art. And it does go beyond just that. The writers went out of their way to not have her ever show interest in males, at least romantically. I think this one time she dances with Shaggy.
This is a groovy dance floor, isn't it, Velma?
Yeah, well, why don't you try dancing on it instead of my feet?
But counter to that, this is how she reacts to him leaving her to dance with Scooby.
I've been a wallflower before, but this is ridiculous.
Yeah, it doesn't seem particularly put out. Velma doesn't even get close to a male love interest until the series was revived in the early 2000s, which is interestingly enough when the original writers are almost entirely phased out. The writers also liked to include scenes like this.
This just gets better and better. Maybe from where you're standing.
Boy, I could sure go for a bedtime snack now.
Groovy idea. Women.
I will grant you that it is never officially stated in the show that she is a lesbian, nor does her first actual on-screen love interest appear until 2012. But, come on. The writers simply wouldn't have been allowed to be more explicit. Basically, Velma in the classic show is a lesbian, in the same way that jugs in cartoons with little X's on the front are alcohol. It's not officially stated, but you know exactly what the writers mean. But what about the male love interests? Considering what a common talking point this is, there are remarkably few examples. There are many men who have had crushes on Velma, but they are very much not returned.
Wait for me.
In your dreams, Knudsen.
But as far as her being attracted to men, it's a pretty small list. This list is padded with people like Johnny Bravo and Sam from Supernatural. And I enjoy both of these crossovers well enough. But these episodes are from entirely different TV shows written by different staffs, mostly functioning as a parody of Scooby-Doo.
She lives in this spooky house up on Widow's Peak.
Spooky house? Jinkies!
Jinkies?
If there are ghosts, that means there's an afterlife. Heaven, hell. Am I going to hell?
We told you every freaking time, but did you ever listen to Scoob and me? No!
They're pretty self-evidently non-canon. So who is the first male love interest for Velma? Some would argue Bo from Zombie Island, which seems like a stretch if I'm being honest.
Got thirsty, went to get a drink, and came back to find these two.
What are you planting, elephants?
There is also Ben from Witch's Ghost, which I think is a significantly stronger case. Because, who isn't attracted to him? He's voiced by Tim Curry. The pure sexual power that radiates off of his voice is off the charts.
It's a spell book. You see, Sarah wasn't a Wiccan. She was indeed a witch.
Now, personally, I have always viewed this as less of a crush and more of her just fangirling over her favorite author. But I understand why others view this as romantic.
Mr. Ravencroft, I am a huge fan of your work. I have read all your books, which, in my opinion, are the best horror stories ever written.
Thanks, Velma.
I'll give it a point on the male love interest counter. There are, of course, the live-action movies. They're really their own thing, and I debated just skipping over them. But for the sake of completion, let's talk about them. In the first, there's this guy. What's his name, you ask? Well, according to the credits, he is, and I quote, Velma's friend. That's an interesting way of labeling him. I wonder if there's a story behind that. Wow, crazy, it appears there is. For those not in the know, James Gunn had a different version of the script which was meant for a more adult audience. Then, the studio decided that they wanted to still be able to sell Scooby-Doo to children, and had it rewritten to be PG. A lot of things were changed, including cutting out every explicit reference to Velma being a lesbian. So it's worth pointing out that Velma being a lesbian was included in the first draft of the script, because even in 2000s, it was common knowledge that Velma is gay, in the same way that it is currently understood that Shaggy is a weed-smoking hippie. We just also are aware that they could not explicitly state that in a 70s cartoon. Along with removing any references to her sexuality, they also insisted on adding this character for Velma to talk to. But he is so clearly not a love interest. He's just the guy she talked to in a bar. Honestly, I think calling him a friend might be too much. In Scooby-Doo 2, she does actually have a male love interest. Patrick. Let's count him because I'm feeling generous, but given just how separate these movies are from even the loose canon of the cartoons, I'm not sure it's really deserved. The final guy Velma has demonstrated a genuine attraction to is in 2011 in the film Scooby-Doo Legend of the Phantosaurus, where she has a crush on an archaeologist. That's the entire list, between 2 and 3 guys, depending on how you count. So yes, those who have argued that she has had male love interest before, yes, you're technically correct.
Technically correct. The best kind of correct.
But first of all, if you compare it to her companion's first canon attractions to the opposite sex, it is way delayed. Notably, after the original writers have left. And if you compare it to the amounts that the other members of Mystery Incorporated have dated, it's really noticeable. And also, considering just how much of Scooby-Doo exists, the fact that there's this few examples speaks volumes. Velma being attracted to men is sort of like Daphne being an expert motorcyclist. Yes, there is some canon to back up such a claim.
It's okay, Shaggy. I can teach you. I've been riding since I was 5.
Right. That'll do.
But there's also some contradictory canon.
It's Daphne on a unicycle.
She can't even ride a bicycle!
And it happens rarely enough that if someone were to suggest that it is a defining trait of Daphne, I would suggest they're being a bit selective with their data. But alright, I know some of you are absolutely screaming at your screen right now. What about Shaggy? This is easily one of the most common talking points, so I'll do my best to consider it fully, but if I'm being honest with you, this one's pretty flimsy. There's Curse of the Lake Monster, where Shaggy has a crush on her, but she doesn't feel the same way. Also, she's possessed by a witch for most of the movie, so I don't really know what can be learned by this. Also, this movie's terrible, so who even cares? Frogs aren't scary! There's Scooby-Doo Apocalypse, where they actually marry and have a child, but if you haven't guessed by the word apocalypse in the title, this is a non-canon story where all the characters act differently to the cartoon. Which leaves us with the big one. Mystery Incorporated! So if you're a big fan of the Shaggy-Velma ship, if you think they have good chemistry together, if you like seeing stories where they interact with each other, all the power to you. Please, make fan art, write fan fiction, make fan theories. If you ever work for Warner Brothers officially, please feel free to write about this ship. But that does not mean that in Mystery Incorporated, Velma actually ever demonstrated genuine romantic interest in Shaggy. Like literally, the entire first season is dedicated to showing this fact. But since there seems to be such confusion about this, why don't we take a little bit of time to break down the relationship in detail and prove that the show creator is not talking out of his ass. Velma is clearly a lesbian in the show, not bisexual. In the pilot episode, we are introduced to this season's status quo. Velma and Shaggy are dating, and it's made very clear that Shaggy is pretty uncomfortable with this situation, and seems to have mostly gotten in over his head. The discussion they have in this episode is about whether they should tell their friends about their relationship. Shaggy being very against it, having not even told Scooby, whereas Velma wants to tell people.
It's Scooby-Doo, he's my best friend. I want to break it to him, like, gently. I'm just waiting for the right time.
How about now? Hey, Scooby!
In the context of the episode, I understand how you could read this as Velma being far more invested in the relationship than Shaggy, and wanting to cross various relationship steps because she is in love. But, with the context of this whole series, this is not what the scene is suggesting at all. It is very significant that Velma is actively pushing for their relationship to be seen as publicly as possible, and that's because that's the only reason she is interested in Shaggy. To specify, she is not in the closet and using Shaggy to avoid scrutiny. This is an internal conflict. Velma at this point in the series has not realized or come to terms with her sexuality. More than that, she is actively in denial, which is why she is being so performative about her relationship with Shaggy. It's not genuine, but it is a way of her saying to herself, "Of course I'm not gay, look at all the straight activities I'm doing." If I can be real with you guys for a moment, this feels so genuine and specific that I would not at all be shocked to learn that this was based on someone's real life experience with realizing their own sexuality. If you're wondering how I know this is the case, rather than it just being the natural difficulty and awkwardness of navigating one's first relationship, well, that is because of how Velma sees Shaggy. Ask yourself this. What does Velma like about Shaggy? At first blush, nothing really comes to mind. She doesn't like how he dresses, actively trying to change his fashion.
You promised me you were going to start caring more about your appearance.
But I like these pants.
You've worn them since the 8th grade.
They're comfortable pants.
Fine. I'll pick them out for you myself.
She doesn't have any interest in his pastimes, being bored and looking down on his love of cheesy horror movies.
Just eating and then go, eating and then go.
For a whole week! Yippee!
Yeah, yippee.
She hates his relationship with food, policing his intake, shaming him for liking junk food, and putting him on a diet.
I'll take an extra large, please.
Didn't we agree that you would cut out the junk food?
I should, totally eat something healthier.
She doesn't even like how he speaks.
Oops. I said again, didn't I? Oh boy, I'm sorry. I just can't help it.
Here, put this rubber band around your wrist. Every time you say the word like, snap it. Hard.
But that will hurt.
That's the point.
Again, actively trying to remodel him to the ideal boyfriend, who she can, in theory, actually enjoy being in a relationship with, instead of just pretending to herself that she does. So what does she like about Shaggy? Well, as far as I can tell, it would be his emotional unavailability. His discomfort with their relationship from the beginning is what makes him safe to date. He doesn't want to hurt her feelings by turning her down, but also will never choose to make a move or initiate anything, pretty much making him the perfect boyfriend for her, completely safe with no risk of him getting emotionally invested. And the proof of this is in the episode in which Aphrodite comes to town and Shaggy is drugged with a love potion. He is finally the emotionally available and affectionate boyfriend she allegedly wants. And she responds,
"Class has started. Go, vamoose." Are we having a low blood sugar moment?
With mild confusion, and that's about it. So yeah, it's made very, very clear that she didn't have any genuine feelings towards Shaggy, which is why her relationship with Marcy is so much better and the one that the show builds towards. It's because she does have feelings for her. One more thing before we move on, because I'm sure I will get comments about it if I don't specify. Why are Velma's feelings so hurt when Shaggy dumps her if she didn't have real feelings for him anyways? Part of this is because if the relationship isn't working, she might have to look inwards to figure out why that is, which is a tough thing to have to do. Also, I would have to imagine part of the reason she's so hurt is because the excuse Shaggy uses basically is, "Sorry, I can't date you. I'm worried that might affect my friendship with my dog."
Make up your mind, me or Scooby?
And sure, she doesn't have romantic feelings for him, but she is still friends with him, and has been for years. So yeah, even if she isn't emotionally invested in the relationship, that kind of rejection is going to hurt. Oops, the video has gotten far too long on me. Sorry I didn't get a chance to talk too much about Velma the show. Maybe I'll make up a follow-up video once it actually starts airing, but for now, let's move right into the conclusion. So if the tone of this video has not made this clear, let me state it explicitly. I think lesbian representation for children is good in of itself, and Velma has a long history of being a lesbian icon, which is awesome. But there is nothing wrong with having preferred versions, storylines, or ships. Liking certain interpretations more than others is nothing to apologize for. There have been many interpretations of this character already, and there will continue to be so. Certainly not all the future interpretations will keep her purely attracted to women. Case in point, literally the show Velma. Just days after this clip went viral, Mindy Kaling confirmed that her version of Velma would be bisexual. So yeah, bisexual Velma exists and is cool. Straight Velma exists and is cool, but don't forget, lesbian Velma also exists, also is cool, and has been like this for a long time.